Everyone's heard of the Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank clash in history. But almost nobody talks about the blow that actually broke Germany's back after Kursk. Summer 1943. The fields around Kursk are burning. German and Soviet armor slam into each other in Adolf Hitler's last great gamble in the East, Operation Citadel. On this map, it looks like just a red bump. In reality, it is a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the Red Army, the Orel salient. And here is the twist almost no documentary explains. Germany's real disaster did not happen at Kursk. It started days later when the Red Army hit back with a code-named hammer blow, Operation Kutuzov. This offensive will bleed German reserves, erase the Orel bulge, and help make sure the Wehrmacht never regains the initiative in the east. Operation Kutuzov was the northern half of the Soviet summer counteroffensive in 1943. It began on 12 July and ran into mid-August, aimed straight at the German Orel salient that jutted east between Bryansk and Kursk. This bulge was held mainly by 2nd Panzer Army under Army Group Center, with parts of 9th Army involved. It was heavily fortified, but dangerously exposed. If the Red Army smashed it, the front would be shoved back toward Bryansk, German supply lines would be threatened, and command cohesion would begin to crack. The codename was no accident. Kutuzov was the Tsarist general credited with saving Russia from Napoleon in 1812. In 1943, that name sent a clear message. This would be another grinding, attritional campaign to wear down an invader and seize back the initiative. In early July 1943, Hitler threw some of his best armored units into Operation Citadel, attacking the Kursk salient from north and south. 9th Army drove south from the Orel region. In the south, German forces struck from Belgorod toward Oboyan and Prokhorovka. Citadel failed. Soviet defenses absorbed the blow. German units took heavy losses, and on 13 July, Hitler called off the offensive, partly because the Allies had just landed in Sicily. At that moment, the Orel salient still stuck out like a broken spear into Soviet lines. But the Stavka had been waiting for this moment. While Citadel raged, Soviet planners had quietly prepared their own strikes. As soon as Citadel stalled, they unleashed them. In the north, Operation Kutuzov would crush the Orel bulge. In the south, other offensives would drive toward Belgorod and Kharkov. This was not a reaction, it was a planned counterpunch. To hit the Orel salient, the Red Army massed 3 major fronts. From the north and northwest came Western Front under Colonel General Vasily Sokolovsky. From the east, Bryansk Front under Colonel General Markian Popov. And from the south, once 9th Army's push at Kursk burned out, Central Front under Konstantin Rokossovsky. Together, these fronts assembled over 1 million men, thousands of guns and mortars, and powerful tank and mechanized corps. The plan? Hit the salient from several sides at once, force the Germans to commit their reserves, and only then throw in more armored formations to break the line. Defending the salient was 2nd Panzer Army of Army Group Center, supported by elements of 9th Army that had just fought at Kursk. Colonel General Walter Model, already known as a defensive specialist, was put in charge of the Orel sector and told to hold the line at almost any cost. On 12 July 1943, while fighting still raged near Kursk, the Red Army opened Operation Kutuzov. Bryansk Front and major parts of Western Front smashed into the northern and eastern faces of the salient, colliding with 2nd Panzer Army's fortified positions. The opening day was brutally expensive. German defenses were deep, layered with minefields and strongpoints, and the Luftwaffe launched heavy sorties against the advancing Soviet columns, knocking out tanks, guns, and vehicles. Many Soviet units failed to crack the first defensive belt in one rush and were forced into grinding, close-range assaults. On 13 July, Army Group Center shifted direct control of 2nd Panzer Army to Walter Model, who already commanded 9th Army.
Centralizing command in the Orel sector let Model throw almost every available armored unit into the most threatened sectors and improvise a flexible fire brigade defense.
At first, Model's methods worked. By rushing armored formations to any sector in crisis, German forces managed to blunt or slow several Soviet breakthroughs. The front bent, but did not immediately snap. However, every battalion sent to Orel had to be stripped from somewhere else. As armor drained from 9th Army, the German advance at Kursk became unsustainable. 9th Army had to surrender the ground it had just taken and pull back toward its original starting positions. By 18 July, the northern pincer of Citadel was effectively undone. From the Soviet perspective, this was exactly the trap they wanted. Kutuzov was designed not just to retake land, but to force Germany to abandon its offensive, commit reserves under pressure, and slowly bleed out in a battle it no longer controlled. Through late July, Soviet troops clawed their way deeper into the Orel salient. Villages changed hands again and again. Casualties were high on both sides. But numbers and relentless pressure were on the Red Army's side, and German units were gradually forced back. By 29 July, Soviet forces liberated Bolkov. Further south, troops pushed toward Karachev, a crucial point about halfway between Orel and Bryansk that sat astride key railways feeding the front. The closer the Soviets came to these lines, the more dangerous the salient became for Model. One step too slow, and his forces risked encirclement. Facing mounting pressure and the threat of being cut off, Model chose to evacuate the Orel bulge. Between 1 and 16 August, German forces carried out a staged withdrawal of roughly 100 kilometers to the west, falling back to the prepared Hagen line deeper in the rear. As German units pulled out, the city of Orel became the immediate prize. Soviet forces converged from multiple directions, fighting their way through suburbs and streets. On 4 August, the battle for the city reached full intensity. Within a day, Orel was in Soviet hands. By 5 August, the Orel bulge, once a menacing projection into Soviet territory, no longer existed. The front line had been shoved back toward Bryansk and the Hagen line, stripping the Wehrmacht of a vital springboard for any future offensive in this sector. The price was severe. German forces committed hundreds of thousands of men and hundreds of armored vehicles in the Orel sector and suffered losses they could not easily replace. The Red Army also took heavy casualties and equipment losses, but Soviet reserves in 1943 were larger and still building. Operationally, Kutuzov erased the Orel salient and forced Army Group Center onto the defensive. From this point on, Germany could no longer treat Orel as a base for major strikes toward Kursk or the Soviet rear. Almost simultaneously, in the south, Soviet offensives near Belgorod and Kharkov hammered Army Group South. In just weeks, Orel in the north and Kharkov in the south were lost, wrecking German hopes of stabilizing the front with limited counterattacks. From the summer of 1943 onward, the Eastern Front entered a new phase. The Wehrmacht could still fight hard and counterattack locally, but its days of launching and sustaining war-changing offensives were over. The strategic initiative had passed decisively to the Red Army, which would keep it all the way to Berlin. When people remember 1943, they pictured tanks colliding at Kursk in clouds of dust and smoke. But without the slower, methodical brutality of Operation Kutuzov, the story of that year on the Eastern Front would look very different. By smashing the Orel bulge and draining German reserves, the Red Army turned a failed German gamble into a lasting strategic turning point. In the months that followed, Soviet forces pushed toward the Dnieper, retook key cities, and laid the groundwork for the liberation of Ukraine and Belarus. Kutuzov was never just about a city called Orel. It was about who would control the tempo of the war in the East. If you want to see how this northern offensive linked with the battles for Belgorod and Kharkov in the south, and how together they shattered the German line in 1943, click on the next episode in this series now. And if you haven't watched the full breakdown of Kursk and Operation Citadel, that deep dive is also on your screen. If this episode helped you understand what really happened after Kursk, do 2 quick things to support the series. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next battles, and leave a comment telling which Eastern Front operation you want covered next. Your clicks, comments, and watch time are what keep this campaign moving forward. Don't stop here. Choose one of the videos on your screen and keep the 1943 campaign going on your screen.